sound of gentle lapping water, birds chirping in the distance. The peaceful sound is suddenly shattered by a deep, guttural, explosive sound, like a monstrous combination of a laugh and a roar, followed by the splintering crash of wood and a human scream that is cut off abruptly. You think you know what a monster looks like. You picture fangs, claws, the shape of a shark in the deep. You've been lied to. The deadliest monster on the entire African continent, the animal that kills more people than lions, leopards, and crocodiles combined, looks like a fat, clumsy water potato. A cartoon. Until it decides to show you the 4-foot-wide set of jaws that can snap a 15-foot crocodile in half like a dry twig. This is the story of a day when a group of tourists came face to face with that truth. A day when nature's goofy giant committed the perfect murder and left no one to tell the tale. If you're ready to see the real face of Africa's #1 killer, you know what to do. Hit subscribe and stay out of the water. Our crime scene is the upper Zambezi River. It's a vast muscular serpent of brown water that serves as the lifeblood and the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe. Here the river is a deceptive paradise. The air is so heavy and warm it feels like a blanket, scented with wild jasmine and the earthy smell of damp riverbanks. The sun paints the sky in impossible shades of orange and violet at dusk. It is a place of profound, almost spiritual peace. This is the Africa people dream about, the Africa they pay a small fortune to experience. And a group of 13 tourists believed they had found it. They were a mixed bag. A German couple celebrating their 20th anniversary. A trio of young Australian backpackers seeking thrills. A retired American doctor and his wife, and others, all united by a thirst for authentic adventure. Their chariot into this wilderness was a long fiberglass canoe, marketed to them as safari grade. In the stern, holding a long wooden paddle, sat their guide, a man named Joseph. Joseph was born in a village that had looked out on this river for generations. He knew the currents like the lines on his hand. He could read the mood of the water from the way the light hit it. He was their shield, their interpreter, their guarantee of safety in this magnificent but merciless land. The group felt an exhilarating sense of vulnerability and freedom, paddling with slow, rhythmic strokes. The modern world felt a million miles away. This was real. This was untamed. An hour into their journey, they came upon a pod of hippos. It was the quintessential safari moment. A dozen of them were submerged in a placid lagoon, looking like a collection of giant gray living rocks. Only their snouts, ears, and bulging eyes broke the surface. They looked completely passive, even comical. One of the bulls let out an enormous yawn, stretching its jaws to an impossible width, showing off a cavern of pink flesh and enormous yellowed tusks. The tourists gasped, then chuckled. The German man with a massive camera lens whispered excitedly, "Did you see the size of that thing's mouth?" Everyone raised their cameras, clicking away, capturing the image of the gentle giant. Joseph, however, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He knew that yawn wasn't a sign of boredom. It was a warning, a threat display, the flashing of deadly weapons. He steered the canoe in a wide, respectful arc, keeping them far from the pod. The danger, he thought, was managed, but the pod in the lagoon wasn't the real threat. The greatest danger in the river is the one you don't see. He was the king of this territory, the dominant bull. A 3,500-pound veteran of countless bloody battles, his hide a thick patchwork of scars. A lone warlord, fiercely territorial, and with a hair-trigger temper. He wasn't with his family. He was resting, alone and unseen, in the deeper central channel. This is where a moment of pure magic became a catalyst for pure horror. A magnificent African fish eagle, its white head blazing in the sun, swooped down from the sky and plucked a silver fish from the water not 50 feet from their canoe. The tourists gasped in unison, their attention and their cameras instantly diverted to the sky. It was a breathtaking, once-in-a-lifetime sight. Even Joseph, who had seen it 1,000 times, couldn't help but watch for a few seconds. And in those few seconds of collective distraction, a subtle shift in the river's current nudged the canoe slightly, imperceptibly off its safe course. They had silently drifted over the invisible line. They had entered the king's private chamber. They had trespassed. From below, in the cool brown darkness, the massive bull would have perceived this not as a harmless drift, but as a direct challenge. The shadow of the canoe passing over his head, the rhythmic dip of the paddles vibrating through the water. It was an intrusion of the highest order. He made a decision. There was no warning trumpet, no aggressive surfacing to scare them away. His response was singular and absolute, total annihilation. For the witnesses on a larger motorized tour boat 100 yards away, the world tore in half. One moment, the canoe was a picture of serenity. The next, the river directly beneath it exploded. It was a volcanic eruption of wet gray flesh and incandescent rage. The 3,000-pound bull launched himself from the riverbed, a living missile of muscle and bone. He struck the canoe's fragile fiberglass hull from below with the force of a truck hitting a tin can. The sound was not a splash. It was a percussive, shattering crack that echoed across the valley. The entire canoe was lifted out of the water, its frame disintegrating over the bull's massive back before it was flipped over. The 13 tourists and their guide were not tipped out. They were catapulted, a chaotic storm of flailing limbs, paddles, cameras, and brightly colored Gore-Tex into the churning, muddy water. The instant they hit the river, they entered a new dimension of terror. The water, so beautiful from a distance, was a blind, suffocating enemy. It was impossible to tell which way was up, which way was to safety. Panic was a contagion. They were choking, disoriented, screaming for loved ones they couldn't see. But their screams and frantic splashing were a dinner bell for the predator whose house they had just broken into. This was no longer a random attack. It was a systematic execution. A hippo in water is not the clumsy creature you see on land. It is a ballet of lethal grace. It can run along the riverbed at 20 miles per hour, appearing and disappearing at will. The bull was a dark, phantom shape moving beneath them, a silent torpedo in the brown gloom. He hunted them, one by one. Imagine the terror, treading water in blind panic only to feel a sudden crushing force from below. To see, for a horrifying final second, that impossible mouth opening up out of the murk. The hippo's jaws don't just bite, they crush, they tear, they dismember. A human body offers no resistance. The massacre would have been swift and horrifyingly efficient. One scream would be cut off with a sickening crunch, then another. Joseph, the expert, would have known instantly that there was no escape. His encyclopedic knowledge of the river was useless against its raw, unleashed power. The bull, in his territorial rage, would have made no distinction between the guide and his clients. They were all intruders. They were all to be erased. By the time the other boat reached the scene, a stunned silence had fallen. The river's surface was once again placid, with only a few pieces of floating wreckage and an ominously spreading pink stain to mark the site of the carnage. And then, the river's undertakers arrived. Sleek reptilian heads broke the surface. The massive Nile crocodiles, drawn by the scent of blood and the vibrations of the struggle, had come to sanitize the crime scene. They are the river's cleanup crew, ruthlessly efficient. Any evidence, any bodies or remains left by the hippo would be swiftly dragged down into the depths, never to be seen again. The river was wiping the slate clean. Rescue teams searched for days. They found a splintered piece of the canoe, a single abandoned sandal, a waterproof bag. Of the 13 tourists and their experienced guide, they found absolutely nothing. They had vanished from the face of the earth, swallowed whole by the wild. The official report would eventually conclude they were victims of a tragic boating accident, presumed drowned. But the traumatized witnesses knew the truth. They had watched a mass murder committed by a creature they used to think was a cartoon. And the killer? The bull hippo was never held accountable. In the brutal justice of the wild, he was the aggrieved party. He was the king defending his realm. He simply returned to his life of lazy afternoon naps and violent territorial disputes. He is a living, breathing, 3,000-pound reminder that when you enter the great wildernesses of the world, you are not a guest. You are a trespasser. And sometimes you face the landlord. This wasn't a monster with a human motive. This was a force of nature, indifferent and absolute. And in that lies a horror no human crime can ever replicate. If this story has given you a new, chilling perspective on the hidden dangers of the wild, show your support by hitting that like button and subscribe for more true stories from the edge of our world.